The night my grandson turned 18, my son looked me in the eye across a restaurant table and said, "Dad, this party is for the family. Maybe you should wait outside." Then he laughed. His wife laughed. A few of their friends laughed. And I sat there holding a glass of water, 67 years old, thinking about the 42 years I'd spent building something, so my children would never have to struggle the way I did. I didn't say a word. I set the glass down slowly, and I slid the dinner bill, all $1,100 of it, across the white tablecloth, right back toward my son Theo. Let me back up. My name is Gerald. I'm 67 years old. I spent 38 years working as a civil engineer, mostly on highway infrastructure projects across the Midwest. I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't a celebrity. I was just a man who showed up early, stayed late, and watched every dollar. Because I grew up watching my father do the same thing in a house where the heat got turned off twice one winter. I knew what it meant to have nothing, and I promised myself my kids wouldn't know that feeling. My wife, Carol, and I had 2 children. Theo, our son, came first. Then 4 years later, our daughter Pam. Carol was the kind of woman who made every house feel like a home. She could stretch a grocery budget, write a thank you note that made you cry, and still find time to coach Pam's soccer team on Saturday mornings. She was the best person I ever knew, and I'm not just saying that because she was my wife. People who barely knew her said it at her funeral. Carol died 22 months ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through all of it. After she was gone, something in me just softened. I don't know how else to say it. I'd spent my whole life being the steady one, the practical one, the one who kept the finances in a spreadsheet and never made a decision without thinking it through 3 times. But grief does something to you. It makes you want to hold the people who are still here a little tighter. And I think I know now that Theo felt that. He saw it and he used it. It started small. That's always how it starts. About 6 months after Carol passed, Theo called me. He and his wife Renata had been talking, he said, about how hard it must be for me to manage the house alone, the yard, the finances, all of it. He said he was worried about me. He said Renata was worried about me. He said they both thought it might be a good idea if he helped me organize things, so I wouldn't have to carry so much by myself. I thought that was kind. I told him so. I said, "Son, I appreciate that." Looking back, I want to shake myself. Over the next several months, Theo suggested I add him to my checking account so he could help pay bills when I was traveling. Then he suggested we move my investment accounts to a financial advisor he knew, a friend of his named Blaine, who had an office in a glass building downtown and a firm handshake. Then he suggested I sign a durable power of attorney, just as a precaution, just in case something happened to me. He sat next to me at my kitchen table, the same table where Carol used to do the Sunday crossword, and he explained it calmly and reasonably, and I trusted him because he was my son. I signed it. I want to be clear about what that document meant, because I didn't fully understand it at the time. A durable power of attorney gave Theo the legal authority to make financial decisions on my behalf, not just to help, to decide. And I'd signed it while I was still in the fog of losing Carol, while I still cried in the car sometimes on the way home from the grocery store because I'd reach for the brand of coffee she liked out of habit. I didn't read it carefully enough. That's the truth. Things started to shift around month 9. Theo and Renata had been looking at a house, a bigger house in a nicer suburb, they said. More space for the kids, better school district. They asked if I'd be interested in helping with the down payment. "Just a loan between family," Theo said. "We'll pay you back, Dad. You know we will." I wrote a check for $60,000. They never mentioned it again. Then it was the kitchen renovation. Then it was a car for Renata. A lease, they said, just to tide her over until they figured out what they wanted long-term. Then Theo's business. He'd started a small commercial real estate consulting firm and needed capital for equipment and staff. Could I help bridge the gap? Just temporarily. Each time I said yes. Each time there was a good reason. And each time I told myself this was what family did. This was what Carol would have wanted, for me to take care of our children. But here's what was also happening. I started to feel the distance. Theo and Renata stopped inviting me to Sunday dinners. When I called, Renata answered more often than Theo, and her voice had that particular flatness that people use when they're performing politeness. My grandchildren, Theo's kids, Brody and Felicity, stopped calling me Grandpa Gerald the way they used to. Brody was 16, Felicity 13. They were on their phones whenever I visited, and Renata had a way of finding reasons for the visits to end early. My daughter Pam noticed before I was willing to. Pam lives in Asheville, North Carolina. She's a physical therapist, married to a man named Carl, who builds custom furniture in his garage on weekends. They have a daughter, my granddaughter Sadie, who is 11 years old, and calls me every Sunday without fail. Pam called me one night after she'd spoken to Theo about something. I don't even remember what now, and she said, "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "How much money have you given Theo?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I told her. There was a long silence on her end. "Dad," she said finally, "do you know about the power of attorney?" I signed one, yes. Theo explained it to me. "Do you know what it allows him to do?" I started to say I did, but the words didn't come out the way I expected, because the truth was, I'd trusted Theo's explanation more than I'd read the actual document. And I was starting to understand, standing in my kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, that those were two very different things. I told Pam I'd look into it. She told me to call a lawyer before I did anything else. I said I would. I should have called the lawyer that night. Instead, I called Theo. That was a mistake. Theo's voice changed the moment I mentioned the power of attorney. Not dramatically. He was too careful for that. But there was a stillness in his voice that hadn't been there before. He said everything was fine. He said I was worrying unnecessarily. He said Renata's father had had a stroke the previous year, and they'd seen firsthand how complicated things got without proper legal arrangements. He said all of this in the same calm, reasonable tone he always used, and by the end of the call I'd almost talked myself into believing him again. Almost. I hung up and sat in my living room for a long time. Carol's reading chair was still in the corner, exactly where she'd left it. She had a stack of books on the side table that I hadn't moved. I don't know why I hadn't moved them. I sat across from that chair, and I thought about what she would say to me right now. And I knew exactly what she'd say. She'd say, "Gerald, stop being sentimental and start being smart." I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Sylvia. She came recommended by a friend of mine named Dawn, who'd gone through a divorce a few years back. She was direct, no nonsense, the kind of person who doesn't waste your time with reassurances. She went through the power of attorney document, and she explained it to me plainly. Theo had broad authority. He could access accounts, make transfers, manage property. The document had no specific restrictions on amounts or purposes. "Has money been moved without your direct knowledge?" she asked me. "I authorized everything," I said, "but I may not have understood what I was authorizing." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Do you want to revoke this? Can I? As long as you're mentally competent. And you clearly are. You can revoke a power of attorney at any time." I signed the revocation that afternoon. She also helped me understand something else. The transfers I'd made had been documented. There were paper trails. And some of the things Theo had done with the POA beyond the checks I'd written directly. Moving funds, redirecting a dividend account, some activity around a brokerage account I hadn't looked at in months. Those things were worth examining more carefully. "I'm not going to tell you this is fraud," Sylvia said. "That's not my determination to make. But I'd suggest you review everything before you decide what you want to do." I spent the next week going through 14 months of account statements. I won't describe the whole thing. It's too long and too painful. But here's what I found. Beyond the checks I'd willingly written, there had been approximately $90,000 in additional transfers. Some to Theo's business accounts, some to a joint account he shared with Renata, some I couldn't trace clearly without more help. Done quietly. Done through the authority I had handed him. I closed my eyes when I added it up. And then I got very calm. That's what happened. Not rage, exactly. Just a cold, clear calm. Because I'd spent 38 years making precise decisions under pressure, and something in me recognized that this was just another problem to be solved. A painful one. The worst one. But a problem, now. The birthday dinner. My grandson Kyle was turning 18. Kyle is Theo's eldest by his first relationship, from before Renata, and I've always had a soft spot for Kyle because he's quiet and thoughtful and reminds me of myself at that age. He'd been accepted to the University of Michigan to study architecture. When Theo texted me about the dinner, I assumed it was a family celebration. I was glad to go. I hadn't seen Kyle in months. The restaurant was called Harrington's. Upscale steakhouse in the suburbs, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and menus without prices. I arrived a few minutes early and was shown to the private dining room Theo had reserved. There were about 20 people there. Theo and Renata's friends, their neighbors, a few relatives on Renata's side. Kyle was at the far end of the table, already looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt someone had made him wear. I found a seat. I said hello to people. I ordered a sparkling water. I was trying. About 40 minutes into the evening, after the appetizers had come and gone and the main courses were being ordered, Theo stood up and walked to my end of the table. He didn't sit down. He crouched slightly, the way you do when you want to have a private conversation in a public space, and he spoke quietly enough that not everyone could hear, but the people nearest to us could. "Dad," he said, "I need to be honest with you. This dinner is really for close family and close friends, people who are part of our lives regularly." He paused. "Renata and I thought it might be better if you found somewhere else to sit tonight. Maybe the bar area? I can have them set you up out there." I stared at him. "We didn't know how to bring this up," he continued, "but things between us have been a little complicated lately, and tonight's supposed to be positive for Kyle." The man to my left had stopped eating. I could hear it, the specific silence of people pretending not to listen. "So you're asking me to leave the table," I said, "just to the bar area. You can still be in the restaurant, at my grandson's birthday dinner." Theo's jaw tightened. "Dad, please don't make this a scene." I looked down the table at Kyle. Kyle was staring at me. He looked mortified. He looked like he wanted to disappear. And I thought about him at 8 years old, sitting in my garage watching me fix a carburetor, handing me tools and asking questions about everything. He'd called me every year on my birthday since he was old enough to dial a phone by himself. I picked up the dinner bill that had been placed near my seat, one of the pre-printed event menus with the pricing on it, $1,140 for the table's food and drink. I looked at it for a moment. Then I set it back down in front of Theo. "You've got it from here," I said. I pushed back my chair, stood up, and I walked to Kyle's end of the table. I bent down and I said, quietly, right next to his ear, "Happy birthday, son, I'm proud of you. Michigan is going to be incredible." I put my hand on his shoulder for just a moment. Then I walked out of Harrington's. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for a while. I thought about Carol. I thought about Theo at 7 years old asking me to teach him to ride a bike, and how I'd run alongside him down our street in Columbus until my lungs gave out. I thought about all of it. Every birthday, every Little League game, every time I said yes when he asked for something. And then I went inside, because there was nothing left to do out there in the dark. What happened in the next 72 hours changed everything. Sylvia had already connected me with a forensic accountant named Ira, who had finished his analysis of the transfers. Sylvia presented me with a clear picture of what had occurred. The additional $90,000+ moved through the POA, the nature of the transfers, the pattern of activity. She told me I had grounds to pursue Theo for financial elder abuse, which is a criminal offense in our state, as well as a civil claim for the recovery of funds. "That's your son," she said plainly. "I want to make sure you understand what this means before you decide." "I understand," I said. I called Pam that night. I told her everything. She was quiet on the phone for a long time, and then she said, "Dad, what do you want to do? Not what should you do, what do you want?" I told her. The next morning, Sylvia filed a report with the County Adult Protective Services Office and simultaneously sent a formal legal demand to Theo for full repayment of the $93,000 taken beyond my direct authorization, with documentation of every transaction. She also notified the financial advisor Blaine that his access to my accounts had been terminated and that his management of my funds during the POA period was under review. 2 days after that, a detective called me. He was polite and professional. He asked me to walk him through the timeline. I did. Theo called me 17 times in 48 hours. I didn't answer. On the third day, Renata showed up at my house. I saw her car in the driveway from the kitchen window. I stood there for a moment, watching her sit in the car, and then I watched her get out and walk to my front door. She knocked. Then she knocked again. I didn't open it. I'd already been advised not to communicate with them directly. And beyond the legal advice, I simply didn't trust myself to say the right thing. Or maybe the truth is I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd spent 67 years being too well-mannered to say. She stood on my porch for about 4 minutes. Then she left. A week after Sylvia's demand letter, Theo retained his own attorney. His attorney sent back a response, disputing the characterization of the transfers, and asserting that everything had been done with my knowledge and consent, which was technically true in the way that someone who doesn't fully understand a document still technically signs it. Sylvia wasn't worried. She said the documentation was clear, the pattern was clear, and the forensic accountant's report made the argument for us without needing to rely on testimony alone. And she had one more card to play that I hadn't expected. 2 years before Carol got sick, back when we were both healthy and thinking clearly and had no idea what was coming, Carol and I had met with an estate planning attorney and drawn up comprehensive documents. Trust, wills, the whole thing. Those documents had very specific language about our assets and the conditions under which they could be managed. Sylvia argued that the POA Theo had me sign actually conflicted with some of those pre-existing arrangements, and that certain transfers he'd made were therefore invalid on their face, regardless of the POA itself. Theo's attorney went quiet for about a week. Then Theo called Pam. He asked her to talk to me. He said he wanted to work this out as a family. Pam told him she wasn't going to carry his messages. She said if he wanted to communicate with me, he had an attorney for that. She called me right afterward and told me what he'd said, and I heard something in her voice I recognized, that specific kind of sadness that comes not from losing someone, but from finally seeing clearly who someone was. "I'm okay, Pam," I told her. "I know you are, Dad," she said. But she sounded like she was reminding herself of that, not me. The civil and criminal matters are still working through the process. These things take time, and I've come to accept that. What I can tell you is that the money has begun coming back. Sylvia negotiated a structured repayment arrangement as part of the civil settlement, with additional amounts to follow pending the outcome of the APS investigation. Blaine lost my business and gained some uncomfortable questions about his own professional conduct during the POA period. Theo's consulting firm has been very quiet lately. Kyle texted me the week after the birthday dinner. Just 3 words. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I wrote back, "Don't be. None of this is yours to carry. Go to Michigan. Be great." He sent back a single thumbs up, and then after a few seconds, a small blue heart. I've started working on the estate documents again with Sylvia. There's a trust being set up for Sadie's education, Pam's daughter. Structured properly this time, with independent trustees and clear conditions. What remains of what I built will go to people who will use it the way Carol and I intended, not as a resource to be extracted, but as a foundation. I take walks in the evening now. Our neighborhood has a park about 6 blocks from the house, and there's a bench near the pond where Carol and I used to sit on summer nights. I go there sometimes, just to think. Last week I sat there and I watched the light change on the water, and I thought about the man I was before all of this fell. A man who thought love meant never questioning, never protecting yourself from the people you'd given everything to create. I don't think that anymore. I think love and discernment can exist in the same heart. I think you can grieve and still see clearly. I think you can be a father and still be a man who doesn't let his name be used against him. Carol would be furious about what happened. She would also, I believe, be proud of what I did about it. That's the thought I hold on to on the bench by the pond, watching the light go, thinking about everything she taught me, about what it means to hold your ground with grace. Some things you build for the people who deserve them. The work now is making sure they get there.